All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. This is Sean Ryan with SmartLedger Solutions, and we're here today with Zach Weiner from VXpass. Zach is the founder of VXpass, and he's here today to give us a brief demo about what they're doing and tell us a little bit more about it. Zach, nice to have you.
Hi, thank you. I guess I'll start with an introduction and then we'll jump into the application.
That sounds awesome.
I have been working in software for over 20 years. I've been working on the blockchain now since late 2016, early 2017, however many years that is while you're watching this demo. But I started my journey wanting to bank the unbanked. I tinkered a little bit, and then I met some friends while I was in Argentina. I had seen the need for banking services in rural Argentina. It made a lot of sense. I met some guys that were just out of grad school, and it just kind of came together. Over the 2 or 3 years of building that business, we won some awards, actually in multiple countries, for the startup and what we aim to do. But by the time we had gotten investment and started working for clients, what we ended up building was more like a logistics application. So come 2020, when the whole world sort of changed and logistics came to a screeching halt, I really kind of reevaluated what we had begun working on. We started with these lofty dreams and we had kind of moved towards enterprise. And luckily my team at that time was pretty supportive about taking a look at what else we could do in the world. So going into April, May of 2020, I started to tinker with other blockchains. The space had grown a lot since 2016. A whole bunch of new chains have been introduced and capabilities at that point. So over the next 4 or 5 months, I built some other demos, things like distributed voting, encrypted own chat application, quick video game, things like that. And November 2020, the news was very heavily covering COVID. There was a number of problems to roll out with the vaccine, from storing it at -80 to distribution to will we have enough alcohol swabs to put on people's arms to get the injections. Every time I saw one of those stories in the news, we had really intelligent people attempting to solve them. Army Corps of Engineers, CEO of Pfizer, CEO of DHL, except for this paper card that they told everybody we were going to have to carry with us. That really couldn't be verified or validated anyway once the card was written. Now I know, I'm sure that many people that will watch this will probably also have somebody like this in their life, but for me, it's my mother. We have a great relationship. She's a highly intelligent woman, and I actually call her for advice pretty regularly. But a lot of times, if you give her an important piece of paper, she's going to put it in a place that she thinks is safe. And come the time to use it, she's not going to remember where it was. Sure. And 3 or 4 months later, when she's cleaning out that safe place, she's going to come across it and be like, I needed this thing. So with all that experience building for the blockchain, knowing that citizens could own their vote, individuals in a chat group could own their messages, that we could own the NFTs that came off of video games, I started to build a representation of this paper card that patients could own so that patients could begin to own their health data. There's not a tremendous amount of, let's call it risky health data that's printed on this card. The risky data is your personally identifiable information. Your name is printed with your birth date and your address. And in some cases, they've gone so far as to put like insurance numbers on these cards, right? To make it easy for whoever may be updating the next one. And you're supposed to carry these things around and present them in plain text everywhere. So with that in mind, I went back to the drawing board and I built a distributed version for patients to own their records. The first version actually assumed that the pharmaceutical companies would be involved. I quickly learned that a startup was not really able to reach large pharma companies in the middle of a pandemic. So we reformed how the application would work and came to this sort of version 2 that you'll see now. We are working on a version 3 that'll be released relatively shortly. It's almost done with beta. Only small differences in that originally COVID was a 2-shot protocol. And not only COVID, but other things like yellow fever and malaria in sub-Saharan Africa have variant protocols depending on new research and what we see adapting to the inoculations. So with that, I'll just get into the application a little bit, and we're going to start at the end. So if you don't mind,
No,
I'll
that
show
sounds
you
great, Zach.
two
Appreciate that. And
screens
just want
here.
to say, I love your focus on, the ownership of data. I think that's a huge, it's refreshing for me to hear that, knowing what all these other platforms are doing out there with our data. So,
Yeah,
kudos to you for looking out for the consumer.
thank you. And as much as it is me looking out for the consumer and population, it's, just as much me looking out for myself and my mom.
Sure.
She doesn't know how to protect her personally identifiable information. She doesn't even know why, putting her name on a piece of paper in public is risky.
Right.
I grew up with computers, so I just understand it a little bit better. Okay, so on the screen right now, what you're looking at is a patient application on the right-hand side, which can be used in any general web browser or a mobile web browser. We built it in browser rather than in an app because as we deploy globally, sometimes there are issues with devices, accessibility to App Store, what App Store is required for deployment, but everybody in the world can access the web via a URL. So at its very base, this is accessible to any smart device that can, see the internet. You're actually seeing a patient that has 2 records already. And so I'm just going to demonstrate what the verification part is, and then we'll get into how we create the records and what is actually being verified. So on the right side with the patient application, you see a QR code. Because I can't flip this screen to the camera, I'm going to just take a picture on my phone here and then point my QR code at this camera. But what you'll see is that in a peer-to-peer manner, without going over the web, no HTTP requests, no STP requests, I was able to share as a patient my name and my blockchain address with somebody who wants to verify that record later. Now, we didn't have to store that on a server. They didn't have to store it on a server. We didn't have to encrypt it to go over the web. It was directly peer-to-peer from the embedding in the QR code to the scanner itself. Now, what you'll notice is that immediately once the scanner saw that there was a QR code that it could read, it attempted to pull out that data and was successful. So it found a couple of bits of information. First is my name, right? What I had saved as a patient, and I'll show you in the record later that the name is not saved at all on the blockchain, and then the address where you will be able to find my records. After ingesting that information, it actually went out to the blockchain, looked for records, found 2, and used the blockchain's digital signature schema to check whether or not these records were authentic. Now, in this case, it found 2 records that it believes were written by an authorized doctor, and that the information within the record matches exactly what the doctor wrote at the time. And so I demonstrate this to show you that if I change any bit of this information, I'm no longer going to get a fully verified record, right? So immediately it's no longer verified. And that could be any bit of this information. It makes no difference. As long as the information is in its entirety, exactly as the doctor wrote it, it can be verified. Any small change thereafter, it's no longer valid. So we talked about what you would use the record for, and you can see that there's a name that's shown up on screen. But first, before I show you what the record actually looks like, I'll show you that I was able to get that across the QR scan because I, as a patient, put this information to my patient application. This isn't stored on a server somewhere. There's no cloud where this is going to sync to. If I log in from a new device, I have to add this information again. It's only local to this machine. But if we take a look at the records that are written, you can actually see here that this is owned by the same address as provided here. You'll notice that there's no name in the record at all. We actually don't even have a field for name.
Wow.
So in the storage on the blockchain, we've used a digital signature schema to verify that the name was what was presented to the doctor without having to store it in a place that can be maliciously accessed later by anybody. Like I was mentioning, that there's security implications. In, I believe it was January 2021, the University of Miami was infiltrated, and the attacker exfiltrated 500,000 patient records from the University of Miami healthcare system. Now, you got to imagine that a lot of those records were from college-age students whose social security numbers are now exposed because that's how they look records up. So they have to go by LifeLock or some other credit lock system because they got healthcare from their university. And that's just not something I ever want to see again. Now, you'll notice that there's a bunch of plain text details in here. Because we don't store the personally identifiable information, the social, phone number, email, name, birth date on this record, we can actually store everything else in plain text for this specific type of record, which also means that researchers can have basic and free access if they can, figure out how to filter this type of transaction down from the blockchain to be able to look at what's going on in near real time, fully anonymized from the patient, which, if you've ever been in medical research, you might recognize sometimes takes 3 or 4 iterations of scrubbing in order to verify that the patient information's been removed from the record. So there's just a huge efficiency there as well. Now, how do we get to this record? So there's two component pieces, right? First is there's a medical credential, which means the doctor is registered with some state body that might be the Medical Board of Florida or Michigan, in a foreign country that might actually be the national government itself, depending on how they organize their accreditations for things like doctors. But either way, there's a record on the blockchain for each accredited medical professional. Okay. And if this record, if the vaccination record or health record is not linked implicitly, or rather explicitly, to a medical credential, it can't show up as verified here. So you won't get this nice green check. There could be a lot of reasons why a system might want to use this type of record keeping without having the authenticity of a doctor. Right. So we don't want to prevent anybody from using the application the way that they see fit. But if they would like to verify these records in a way that's trusted through, the global sources, then they kind of have to go through we call it Know Your Doctor, KYD process in order to have one of these medical credentials. Now, I don't think that VXpass should be issuing those forever. I would like to hand it off to the Florida Medical Board of Doctors. Sure. And, the actual, but for the meantime, like I said about pharma, we can't expect that they're just going to do everything that we ask, right? So we've set up these systems to hand it off to them later. So now you've seen the record, you've seen sort of what the patient application looks like, but how do we get to that record? And so you'll see on the screen now, I'm just going to hide these other views real quick to make this a little more clear, is a very simple doctor, nurse, or medical practitioner application. We call this aftercare. So in this case, we're talking about patients who have already been inoculated or have already received care in some respect. We do have an application for, point of care, which is, it's actually quite a bit more simple. So I'm just going to demonstrate this one for now. But what you'll notice is that we've made Web3 and blockchain incredibly simple for the end user. So the doctor or nurse practitioner nurse doesn't need to worry about having a crypto wallet. They don't need to worry about their spendable BSV, levels. We've taken care of all that, wallet interaction behind the scenes. They just sort of log in with their seed, or if they'd like to upgrade with a username and password. But all you really need is a seed, and this is open, access for everybody. So you interact with it the same way that you would almost any other SaaS application. In this case, now I'm actually going to have to go create a new patient. Hold on 1 second. I'll demonstrate that for you live as well. So I'm just going to sign out of this account. Let's get rid of this. And in blockchain, the account itself doesn't have to be provided by a server, the state. Right? We use a seed, we use public and private key. So all of that account creation can happen on the client side without any communication to a server whatsoever. And that was the approach that I've taken here for VXpass. So once the account is created, you get to a page where you can save and store your seed for login to VXpass, but you can also take your private key along with you to other medical applications that might use the same sort of blockchain infrastructure, so that even if VXpass doesn't know how to interact with it, you can still bring your records to that application. That's one of the beauties of the blockchain, right? It's your account, not us lending you your account. And then, if you'd like to copy your address, you don't need this for login, but it makes it easy for sharing. And the patient, I shouldn't have clicked records, I should have clicked profile, can choose how much or how little information to share. We found that there's a nice use case for this in undocumented populations, where the undocumented may just generally be scared of going to something where they have to give their information. And so the patient can choose not to put this information here. I'm going to choose to. And the redeem code is for billing. So let's not worry about that just yet. It's not necessary for the application. I'll put in some of my other information. And then when I save this, it's just saved locally, right? So it's not stored in a cloud. It's not going to sync. But when I go back to the record side, now all that information is embedded in my QR code. And you can see this patient does not have any records yet, right? If I check for records, nothing shows up. So I'm going to do that same nifty little cell phone trick here again. Take a picture of this QR code. And then scan it into the provider application. Minimize this. Let's see what happened here. Oh, we got it. I guess I just didn't give it enough time to load. So you can see that the blockchain address for the patient was loaded in. The name that was provided by the patient was loaded in, and the birth date. So now we can start to add some of the medical information, right? It's just easy to choose from the manufacturers. There aren't that many in COVID. The lot numbers are provided. Now, this would all be done by a medical professional who's either looking at a state or nationally run database and updating what they find from the official records, or a patient having come back to the same office that they received the inoculation from. So the doctor is basically putting in the copy of their own records here. We're doing this in off time, so I'm using demo data. But all of these things will be saved. 2021. Let's give it a site. CVS. Actually, I should probably not use CVS since they're not paying me for this advertisement, but that's okay. And so you can see that before, when the information was not complete, the send button was not enabled. But as soon as all the information is complete, that send button becomes enabled. So you can see if you missed anything that was important. In this case, the patient has provided us their information. They might have walked into the office and scanned their QR code under a tablet or reader. But if they had not, there are some methods here now to provide the patient information to them. So let's assume for a second a patient comes into the office. They've never signed up for anything before. They don't have their phone on them. What do? We could either print their QR code for them that they could take a picture of later, or we could send them their seed, right? So that they could log in later. It's up to the doctor and how they might want to do that. Patients who don't have a cell phone, who don't have a smartphone, can get a printout of their QR code so they could kind of get it laminated and move around as needed. But once those things have been provided, if that's necessary, the doctor or nurse will take a look at the staged information, double check it that it's correct before sending it off to the blockchain, and then submit it to the blockchain. Upon successful save, you get a little notification that says it was successful. If there was an error, it would say so. And then all of the patient information is removed. So without touching anything, none of it's stored on the doctor side, right? This is it's not in the cloud anywhere. And so, this could be a mass vaccination site that just essentially deletes the patient's information as it rolls. So you could basically do scan and go, scan and go, scan and go. And so what we'll see here now is that when I bring up the patient application, when I check for records, they're going to be available, right? So now there's 2 records there. I probably should have shown you that quicker so you could see how almost immediate it is. But even in the 30 seconds we had conversing, oftentimes it's a lot quicker than what we might get through email or whatever processes there are. Now, these are the patients to take wherever they want. In this case, we may be talking about international travel. We might be talking about things like long-term care facilities, right? It really doesn't matter because at any point in time, this website for verification is public. The patient is under no obligation to share or expose their information should they choose or feel that they don't want to. But if they are in a scenario where it seems reasonable to do so, there's an application that nobody needs to sign up for. There's no login here in order to verify this record, so that the scanner, let's say a long-term care facility, is also provably not storing that information somewhere. We're using our application to do the verification, and we are not storing it anywhere. So none of this personal stuff that you might see on screen here that was shared through the P2P mechanism is exposed to be exploited later in any way. Now, I do want to show you at least a little bit about what the provider does. So we talked about that medical credential on the blockchain. You as a doctor may have more than one cred, right? You might be licensed as a general practitioner and then specialize in, I don't know, neurology or something like that. You might also get a special medical license to write prescriptions for marijuana, right? Those are 3 different types of licenses that could all be listed here so that we can start to create documentation record keeping for many different types of, I don't even want to say medical procedures, just medical history for the patient if it's necessary.
Right.
We're probably not going to be storing things like, had a bad allergy day, right? Maybe we do. Maybe there's some value in, aggregating the allergic reactions to pollen of all people. But right now, I don't really see that. But, if you had surgery, right, maybe this type of surgery you had, the end result, and the doctor or facility that gave you might be reasonable for the next treating physician to know about, and whatever your needs might be. Now, like we mentioned, the credential is provided by an authoritative body that we partner with. We actually write out that credential now for ourselves, all the credentials are visible on chain at the click of a button. So from beginning to end, the doctor already had this account provision for them, was able to write the records in maybe a minute or 2, most of the information shared from the patient to the doctor. And then the patient was able to get and verify their and have their record verified inside of the next minute. And that's basically the entirety of the application to start. Now, I do, before we end and open for questions, want to show you that in our next version of this, we can actually add more than 2 doses. So I'm just going to demonstrate what that means real quick with some dummy data. So for something like yellow fever or malaria, they take 4 or 5 doses. What was the other one? That's dengue fever is another 4 dose. We can have as many as are necessary for the protocol, and all of those records will be written in the same one shot, in the same one save.
This makes so much sense. The efficiency that's creating is amazing.
So, with that, we've been able to securely share data from patient to doctor, securely write data from doctor to blockchain, and securely share information from patient to validator, all without saving any social, email, phone number, name, birth date, or anything that might expose you.
Wow.
So I'm gonna close this screen share if you don't mind, and let you. Actually, I'll leave it open if you have any questions.
Zach, the application looks amazing. The user friendliness, it looks like it just has an amazing flow. And I'm just thinking of some of the applications in the future. Is this something that we might be able to store our own medical records on as a card in the future? Because I know me personally in the past, I've had issues going from different doctors and them not knowing the full record of what I've been through. The stuff that I want them to know about so they can make, a more educated, diagnosis on what I'm there for now. Is that, something that people will be able to use this for in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So me personally, I am a fundamental believer that we should all be getting MRIs pretty regularly. I'm not going to tell you that you should be going to X-ray your body all the time, but what I am telling you is that from what I understand about medicine and nuclear medicine, the more often you can get an image of the inside of your body, the earlier you will be able to detect changes. So what that really means is that whether it's a malignant cancer or just some, small change. So let's say you have an inflamed gallbladder or the precursors to heart disease. All of those things will show on an MRI if we can relate back to your previous scans. And right now, the way that the blockchain works, just generally from Bitcoin to Ethereum to Polygon and ADA, there's no way that you could ever store a high resolution image on chain, right? You'd store a hash of it and put it on AWS or some other cloud server. That makes it nearly inaccessible for research. But your MRI is a single shot without the history is nearly anonymized. right? So that's the type of thing that a research institution should be able to license from you in an anonymized way with no trace or transaction back to your personal identity. And in order to do that, you must be able to have more than one address that you can use as your medical history, right? So what we're saying here is not using one address for every single record you've ever had, but using one seed to create new addresses for different types of records. So for instance, let's say, in an extreme case, you're a person who is exposed potentially to sexually transmitted diseases through your job, right? There's at least 3 types of employment that you could think of. 2 might be controversial, but 1 is a nurse, right? Okay. So in doing this, there might be a good reason for you not to want to share your sexual health history with an insurance provider if that sexual health history does not have anything to do, right? Like maybe you say you got gonorrhea once, with the insurance mechanism. So you should be able to select between the folders or the addresses that you would like to share with this particular doctor and let the doctor decide if there are too many gaps in your history. It makes
so much sense. Yeah, absolutely. It makes complete sense. You should have the ownership, and, if it's not necessarily for them to see it at that time, you shouldn't have to be obligated, or they shouldn't have access to be able to see those types of things. Absolutely. I like the amount of the ownership and the that this brings back to you. It gives me a lot of hope for the future of healthcare, because I've had some bad experiences with through so my grandmother being in the hospital, even to me being in the hospital, where there's been mistakes made because of certain things. But this is
back to my own personal story. I wrecked a scooter in Thailand. I got road rash, all down one side of my body. It was 10:30 at night. They took me to the nearest hospital, which didn't have it was in an island in Thailand, right? So this wasn't mainland, it was middle of nowhere. They took me to the hospital that didn't have a real roof. It was like a makeshift. And the doctor spoke no English. Now, I'm sure he was qualified to do what he did, right? It wasn't major. But I had actually received a tetanus shot just 3 years earlier. There was no way for me to convey to that doctor at that time, because he didn't speak English, that I didn't need a tetanus shot. So I got one anyway. Now, there's probably nothing that's wrong with that. I'm sure they've done lots of testing on getting a tetanus shot twice in 3 years, and there's probably, we haven't heard anything in the public news about it. But I could imagine that in a scenario where whatever that emergency situation was required a more drastic injection of any type of medicine, that the ability to share your record outside of being able to speak the same language is very, very important. Powerful. Once it becomes available.
No, you nailed it. Just to be able to, exactly. I'm sure there'll be ways to translate things in the future to different languages as well. And I mean, for me, it's an extremely valuable piece of, software to, have on your phone. So thanks for creating it. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
No,